Have you ever made statements like, he made me angry or she ruined my day? Maybe you've said it today or this week because it's so common and usually it sounds harmless, even normal and justified. But what I've come to find out is that hidden inside that statement is one of the oldest distortion in human thinking. Let's go back to the beginning in Genesis. Can you remember what happened when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit and God came in the evening and asked if they had eaten of the fruit of the tree? Can you remember their response? They basically said, each one said, it wasn't me. Adam said, it's the woman you gave me. And Eve pointed squarely at the serpent. Did you notice that none of them said, I chose? So you see, from the beginning, humanity has learned to shift responsibility. And I will say that we've been perfecting it ever since. But you see, I also, like most other people, have been making that statement for most of my life. However, I can remember clearly when I first became aware of the limiting effects that this way of thinking had on me. It was back in 2016. At the time, I had worked for a particular company for about 5 years, but financially, I was always struggling. You see, I believed it was because my salary almost always came late, sometimes incomplete, sometimes several months we wouldn't get paid for one reason or the other. And so I ended up racking up debt and was constantly behind on my bills. So I had this feeling, I felt frustrated and unhappy about this situation. And you could say rightly so. At least that's how I felt. In fact, I still remember those conversations with my colleagues those days. We would sit around when our boss was out of the office and talk and chatter and complain. We would say things like, if only he paid us properly, if only he would pay us on time. We would suggest that if only he would manage the finances of the company more effectively. You see, we were convinced our boss was the reason for our financial difficulties. And honestly, I know I felt justified. After all, I would say, wasn't I right? And even you listening to me right now, you might actually feel our complaints were justified. You may even quote the scripture that says, a laborer is worthy of his wages. On a certain day, I came across a quote from author Steve Covey that started a process that eventually freed me. That quote says, anytime we think the problem is out there, That thought is the problem. The quote kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I must say that at first, I didn't quite agree with it. I didn't feel it applied to my own situation. So I made a case for myself. But around that same period, I came across other ideas that actually pointed in that direction. First, I came across Proverbs chapter 24, verse 10, which says that if thou faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. Interestingly, that scripture focused on me and the smallness of my strength. It didn't analyze the size of the adversity, it pointed at me. And to be quite sincere with you, for the first time, I felt quite exposed. So I didn't quite imbibe this. It didn't quite make total sense to me. Then, not too long after that, I listened to a minister talk about something that he was speaking about relationships, especially broken relationships. And he suggested that something that me and you are quite aware of, if we are being honest, that usually when a relationship ends, there's a tendency for us to focus on what, and we seem to always know what the other person did wrong. We're usually very aware of what the other person did wrong. But he suggested that if we do not consider and think about what role we played in the friction, what role we played in how the relationship turned out, that we are likely to take those same characteristics and traits that we contributed to the chaos into a new relationship. And that eventually they are likely to also become an issue in the new one we were going into. So he wasn't suggesting by any means that the other party was innocent. No. But what he was doing instead was refocusing our minds. So it was refocusing my mind to the fact that, yes, the person might have their own issues, but the truth is, what role did I play? What role am I playing? And this was when I suddenly started to get the picture. I started to get the picture. And interestingly, at that same time, different other sayings and ideas that I had heard in the past, or that I was maybe not consciously aware of, but I had heard them in the past, started coming up. One of them is the fact that when you point a finger at someone else, at least three of your other fingers are pointing back at you. Ironic, isn't it? But the one that got me to totally understand this was the saying of Jesus. Jesus actually said, he said that you should remove the log in your own eye before you can remove the speck in your brother's eye. He suggested, interestingly, that the bigger obstacle is actually us. That we have the bigger obstacle, that we had a log compared to the speck in the other person's eye. So it was at that point I began to reflect on my financial situation. And I must tell you, what I found out both shocked me, but also freed me. I came to realize that deep down, at the root of all this was uncertainty. You see, I had studied engineering, but I was quite aware quite early on in my engineering days that from the kind of person I was, I had no business being an engineer. But up till that moment, I was thinking about it. I didn't quite know what to do with my life. So there was some friction. And what this friction did was it kind of stopped me. I allowed it to stop me from fully developing myself as an engineer, as a professional in my field, in that field, as much as I should have. And so, because I felt that I had not developed myself and was not a good enough engineer, I was actually afraid. Afraid that if I left that company, afraid that if I left that bad, seemingly bad situation, my incompetence, my perceived incompetence as an engineer would be exposed somewhere else. I was concerned that I would be seen as not being good enough. So, my staying in that situation and in that company and blaming my boss allowed me to hide behind his perceived weaknesses so I wouldn't have to confront my own. You see, I came to realize that blaming someone else often hides and masks what we are failing to face in our own situation. You see, for me, I was running away from my fear and my feelings of inadequacy. However, what this reflection did was that as I continued this process, having this understanding helped me to see more clearly. And as I became clear of the root cause, I started to deal with it. And what happened was after about a year, I was able to deal with this and became confident enough that I resigned from that job. Even though I had no other job lined up. And what followed was that I was able, as an independent engineer, in the years that followed, to make more than when I was on the job. And also, it allowed me the freedom to reflect and think about what I wanted to do going forward. And I was able to carve out a path for myself and eventually transition into a new career. A career of my choosing, of my liking, that I felt was in line with my natural skills and capabilities. None of that would have happened if I had continued focusing on my boss's perceived weakness and allowing it to blind me to my own issues. But I need you to understand that taking responsibility does not mean that others are innocent. No, no, no. That's not the intention. That's not what it means. It does not excuse injustice. All it meant for me was that taking responsibility meant that I refused to surrender my agency. You see, responsibility and agency go are interconnected. And where responsibility ends, our personal power ends. The moment we take responsibility, we may not control the situation, but at least we regain control of our response to the situation. And I can assure you, as I came to find out, that response is power. So, what I want you to do this week is to start noticing where you make these kinds of statements. He made me angry. It's her fault. If only they would change. And ask yourself, is he making me angry, or am I choosing to be angry? So I'm basically asking you, suggesting that you ask yourself, what role am I playing in this? I can assure you, as I got to find out, that initially that question may feel uncomfortable. But if you start doing that, you would find out, like I did, that inside it is your power. I am God's will Ikechukwu, and this is From Within. See you in the next one.